"Step away from the door, sir. Hands where I can see them." The command sliced through the quiet suburban night like a floodlight snapping on, washing the porch in accusation. Two officers stood at the bottom of the steps, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes fixed on the tall black man unlocking his own front door. A neighbor's porch camera blinked red in the corner, recording everything: the tension, the suspicion, the certainty written into their stance before a single question was asked. And the man they were staring down, the man they believed was trespassing, the man they'd already judged as a threat, he didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch, didn't even turn fully toward them. He just exhaled once, steady and controlled, the kind of breath someone takes when they already know how the next 5 minutes will unfold. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Agent Lawson. The taller officer stepped forward, boots grinding against the gravel, flashlight beam climbing up Lawson's back like a warning flare. "Sir, you've been reported for suspicious activity. This is a private residence." Lawson finally turned, keys still in hand, porch light catching the faint tension in his jaw. He wore a charcoal jacket and simple khakis, nothing flashy, nothing threatening, except to men who'd been trained to see his skin as the first and only credential that mattered. The second officer circled wide, scanning the yard, the windows, the car in the driveway, as if searching for evidence of the crime they'd already convinced themselves was happening. "We got a call," the first officer repeated, louder this time. "Neighbors said someone's trying to break in." Lawson kept his voice calm. "I live here." "We'll need proof of that," the officer snapped back, not even pretending to hide the doubt. "ID and now." Lawson didn't move. Not yet. Because he remembered a night 12 years earlier, walking into his own apartment building after a 40-hour rotation and being pinned against the wall by rookies who mistook exhaustion for aggression. He remembered the weight of their knees, the heat of their breath, the apology that came only after someone checked the system and found out he was one of theirs. A decade later, nothing had changed. Except now, he outranked every one of them. The officer's radio crackled. A neighbor peeked through her blinds. A dog barked 3 houses away. And in the middle of it all, Lawson stood still, the quiet center of a storm they didn't realize they had walked straight into. "Show us your ID," the officer demanded again. "Or we'll detain you for trespassing." Lawson finally reached for his wallet, but not fast enough for their comfort. Both officers stiffened, hands brushing their holsters, fear rising faster than logic. Lawson's voice cut through their panic like a scalpel. "You're making a mistake." The taller officer scoffed. "Yeah? And who exactly do you think you are?" Lawson held up his badge, not flashing it, not swinging it around, just presenting it with the kind of cold authority that shifts entire rooms. The gold caught the porch light. "FBI. Special agent in charge." And for the first time that night, neither officer had anything to say. The porch light trembled slightly as Agent Lawson held his badge steady, but the officers did not step back. Not yet. Shock flickered across their faces, but reflex ego rushed in to cover it. The taller officer narrowed his eyes as if the gold seal could somehow be counterfeit simply because of the hand that held it. "Anyone can buy a badge online," he muttered, voice tight with defensiveness rather than logic. Lawson did not blink. "Federal identification cannot be purchased," he replied. "You know that." But logic did not matter, prejudice had already built its foundation. The second officer moved closer, the gravel beneath his boots crunching in slow, sharp beats that seemed to echo down the quiet street. A porch light across the road snapped on. A door cracked open. A neighbor stepped out, arms folded, watching as if this were entertainment instead of escalation. The taller officer spoke again, louder this time, hoping volume would compensate for doubt. "If you really live here, why did the neighbor call you in?" Lawson's jaw tightened for the first time that night. He remembered being 15, sprinting up the steps of his aunt's house after basketball practice, only to be stopped by a patrol car demanding to know which house he was cutting through. He remembered the humiliation of proving his right to exist in a place he already belonged. Decades later, he was standing in the same story, only now with a badge, a title, and an entire field office under his command. The call was wrong, Lawson said calmly. And your assumptions are wrong. The officer took a final step closer until he was nearly on the first porch step. Step away from the door. We need to verify your identification. Lawson's voice stayed low. You already have my identification. We need to verify the identification behind the identification, the officer insisted, a phrase so circular it nearly collapsed under its own weight. From the corner of the porch, a small security camera clicked as it adjusted focus, capturing the exchange frame by frame. Lawson lifted his phone slowly, deliberately, making sure the officers saw every inch of movement. I am calling my assistant, he said. She will confirm my identity. The taller officer scoffed. An assistant? That does not prove anything. Lawson dialed anyway. The call was answered on the first ring. Sir, a composed voice said through the speaker, everything is ready. The officers stiffened, confused. Lawson continued, activate internal verification protocol for field office command. There was a brief pause, and then the assistant replied, confirmed. Protocol is live. Local police liaison has been alerted and is joining the call. The taller officer's face drained of color. The second officer stepped back instinctively. A new voice crackled through the phone, firm and authoritative. This is Deputy Director Hall. Stand down immediately. The man you are attempting to detain is Special Agent Lawson, the commanding officer for your federal district. The world went silent for 3 full seconds. A dog barked in the distance. A sprinkler turned on somewhere down the street. And the two officers who had been so certain mere minutes ago now looked like men realizing they had walked directly into their own career-ending storm. The taller officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, the kind of silent panic that only shows up when a man realizes the ground beneath him has shifted in a way he cannot undo. Agent Lawson lowered his phone slightly, the porch light casting a steady glow across his badge as if the night itself wanted to underline the truth they had refused to see. The second officer stepped back again, boots scraping against the gravel in a nervous shuffle, his earlier confidence draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug. Sir, we did not. No, he stammered, but Lawson did not respond. He did not need to. The silence between them stretched thin, tight, louder than any reprimand he could have spoken. Then another voice joined the moment, small but sharp from the far end of the street. A teenage boy filming on his phone whispered, they really tried to arrest the man who runs the FBI office, the disbelief in his tone carrying all the way down the block. His mother tugged him closer, but her eyes never left the porch, her expression caught between fear, anger, and recognition of a pattern she had seen too many times. The taller officer finally found his voice, though it cracked as he spoke. Your badge, it looked unfamiliar under the light, he said, reaching for an excuse that carried no weight. We needed to make sure. Lawson inhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man takes when he is deciding whether to let the truth sit in the air or drive it in with precision. You did not question the badge, Lawson said, his voice quiet but cutting. You questioned the man holding it. Neither officer argued, because there was nothing left to hide behind. The porch camera clicked again as it auto-adjusted, capturing the shame settling into their posture. But the humiliation was not the point, the truth was. A cruiser rolled up at the edge of the street, this one driven by Sergeant Elaine Porter, the police liaison to federal agencies. She stepped out immediately, posture straight, eyes sharp, already aware of what had happened. Agent Lawson, she said, respectful, firm, her voice carrying authority that contrasted sharply with the trembling officers beside him. I received the alert. Are you unharmed? The two officers turned toward her like drowning men spotting a lifeline, but she did not look at them. Lawson nodded once. I am fine, he said. But this was unnecessary. Sergeant Porter finally faced the two men, and whatever they had hoped to see in her expression was not there. You detained the commanding federal officer for this district on his own property, she said. Explain yourself. The taller officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The second officer tried instead, but his explanation collapsed before it began. We received a call, suspicious activity. It was dark, we thought. Sergeant Porter cut him off sharply. You thought he did not belong here, she said. A murmur rippled from the neighbors who had stepped outside, some recording, some simply watching with heavy familiarity. Lawson's phone vibrated once. His assistant's voice came through softly but firmly. Sir, protocol documentation has begun. Every word spoken since you initiated the call is being logged. The liaison's report will be attached. The officers blanched. The night no longer felt still. It felt like judgment had arrived. Sergeant Porter stepped closer to the two officers, her footsteps steady, controlled, the kind that carried decades of experience and absolutely no tolerance for incompetence. The taller officer tried to stand straighter, as if posture alone could undo the last several minutes, but his hands fidgeted near his belt, betraying the panic he was trying so desperately to hide. This is a federal command officer, Porter said, her voice crisp enough to cut through the night air. And you treated him like a suspect on his own front porch. Her words did not rise, but they landed with unmistakable weight. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, their porch lights forming a jagged constellation across the cul-de-sac. Some had phones raised, others simply watched with expressions that said they had seen variations of this story before, just never with stakes this high. Agent Lawson remained still, back straight, hands relaxed at his sides, the embodiment of calm authority. But beneath that stillness, something deeper was shifting, a decision forming in the silence between breaths. The second officer cleared his throat, desperate to salvage whatever dignity he could find. We acted on a call. The neighbor reported a break-in. We followed protocol. Lawson turned his head slightly, the porch light catching the edge of his expression. Protocol does not begin with assuming the homeowner is a criminal, he said. Protocol does not involve drawing conclusions before asking a single question. The officer's jaw clenched, but he did not argue, because there was no argument left to make. Sergeant Porter held up her hand. Who placed the call? She asked. The taller officer hesitated, then admitted, the neighbor at number 12. Porter nodded slowly. And did either of you verify the information before approaching an occupied home with your hands near your weapons? The silence that followed was not empty. It was condemning. The second officer looked away, toward the street, toward anything that was not the truth tightening around him like a noose. Lawson remembered another night years ago, standing outside a different house, wearing his first FBI field jacket, stopped by local police who insisted his credentials were fake. He remembered the humiliation, the confusion, and the moment he realized the badge he worked so hard to earn could not protect him from the assumptions people carried the moment they saw his skin. Tonight was not new. It was only louder. Lawson's phone vibrated again. His assistant's voice spoke clearly through the speaker. Sir, the regional director has been notified. Documentation is being compiled. Do you want me to proceed with formal review initiation for both officers? The taller officer's head snapped up. No, please, he blurted, panic cracking his voice. We can resolve this. We do not need a federal review. But the night did not belong to him anymore. Lawson looked at Sergeant Porter. Did their actions follow your department's protocol? He asked. Porter exhaled slowly, weighing her words with care. No, she said. They did not. A low murmur rippled across the street as the weight of her statement settled. The taller officer took a step forward, palms out, as if begging for the storm to reverse course. Sir, we made a mistake, he said. We misread the situation. It was dark. We were on edge. You have to understand, what I understand, Lawson said, voice steady as stone, is that I was treated like a threat in front of my own home. The officer swallowed hard. We are sorry. Lawson's expression did not change. You are sorry for the consequences, he said. Not for the assumption. The porch camera clicked again, capturing every word, every shift of power, every drop of truth finally spoken aloud. The taller officer's apology hung in the air, thin and trembling, but nothing in Agent Lawson's expression shifted. He stood in the same calm center he had held since the encounter began, the kind of stillness that does not come from fear but from mastery. A wind moved across the street, rattling a set of wind chimes on a nearby porch, their soft metallic tones cutting through the unease like a quiet reminder that the night was listening too. Sergeant Porter stepped forward, her voice precise and unyielding. A mistake is entering the wrong address on a report. What you did was assume guilt before you assessed any evidence, she said. Her tone carrying the weight of someone who had seen this pattern too often to call it anything other than what it was. The second officer shifted his feet, his voice barely above a whisper. We did not intend any harm. Lawson looked at him directly for the first time. Intent does not erase impact, he said, his voice level, controlled, echoing the grounded composure he was known for inside the federal building but rarely had to summon on his own front porch. A woman across the street stepped closer to her fence, clutching her robe tightly as she watched, her face drawn with the kind of heavy recognition only lived experience can form. She whispered to her teenage son, "This is why we do not open the door after dark," and he nodded without taking his eyes off Lawson. Porter turned to the officers again. Did either of you consider that the homeowner might be the individual unlocking the door? Or did you stop thinking after the caller described a black male? The taller officer flinched, he looked like a man being held underwater by the truth, struggling for a justification that did not exist. We reacted based on the information we had, he insisted, but the weakness in his voice betrayed the certainty he had earlier. Lawson folded his arms across his chest, not defensively, but with the quiet authority of a man who had spent years navigating hostile assumptions with dignity. Information is not the problem, he said. Interpretation is. At that, the second officer's face tightened, but he did not disagree. The night thickened with silence. A motion light at the edge of Lawson's driveway flicked on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, stretching the tension even wider. Lawson's assistant came through the phone again, her tone steady. Sir, the regional director is requesting confirmation on whether to proceed with the federal misconduct review. The system is waiting for your authorization. The words hit the officers like a shockwave. Their faces paled, their breathing quickened, and suddenly they stood not as enforcers but as men staring down the consequences of their own unchecked assumptions. Agent Lawson, the taller officer pleaded, please, we will cooperate with whatever you need. We do not want this to end our careers. Lawson took a step forward, not aggressive, but undeniable, the kind of step that shifts an entire room without raising a single decibel. You were willing to end my life with less hesitation than you were showing about your careers, he said. The officer's eyes widened, shame and realization cutting deeper than any reprimand. Sir, we are requesting another chance. Lawson held their gaze for a beat that felt like an eternity under the porch light. A chance is something you offer before turning a man into a suspect, he replied. Not after. The camera on the porch clicked again, capturing the moment the night drew its line. Sergeant Porter drew in a slow breath, the kind that carried equal parts discipline and disappointment, before she spoke again. Agent Lawson, I need to formally ask whether you want these officers removed from scene authority while this incident is reviewed, she said, her tone steady and procedural, but her eyes revealed how deeply she understood the magnitude of the moment. The taller officer's shoulders tensed visibly. The second officer's breathing quickened, his composure unraveling in real time. Lawson did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out across the street where neighbors stood on their lawns and porches, forming an unspoken audience to a truth they had witnessed countless times but rarely saw addressed with this level of accountability. A man in a gray hoodie leaned against his mailbox, filming quietly. A woman 2 houses down crossed her arms, her expression firm and knowing, as if she had lived versions of this story her entire life. The street felt suspended in a strange, heavy pause, as if even the night air was waiting for Lawson's next move. Lawson lifted his phone slowly, again making sure every movement was visible. Nia, he said, addressing his assistant by name for the first time during the encounter, begin internal escalation and link Sergeant Porter's body camera feed if available. The officers exchanged a panicked glance. Nia's voice came through with unwavering professionalism. Confirmed, sir. Escalation initiated. The system is requesting final verification from your end. Sergeant Porter nodded once, her jaw tight as she pressed a button on her radio. Body camera feed is now active. Federal channel is open. The taller officer started to step forward, but she immediately raised her hand, stopping him cold. "Do not move," she ordered. He froze. Lawson's gaze shifted back to the officers. "You need to understand something," he said, his voice quiet but carrying authority that did not need volume to be felt. "You did not see a man entering his home. You saw a threat. You saw a profile. You saw a story you created before you even stepped out of your cruiser." The second officer swallowed hard. "We misjudged. We were on alert tonight. There have been break-ins." Lawson shook his head. "Alert does not justify assumption. And break-ins do not justify drawing conclusions about the homeowner before asking one single question." A porch light flickered at the end of the street. Someone whispered, "He is right," and the words traveled through the air like confirmation. Sergeant Porter glanced at Lawson. "Agent Lawson, do you want to file an immediate misconduct report? Or do you want to proceed to the on-site administrative suspension of both officers pending review?" The officers stiffened, their futures balancing on the next breath that left Lawson's chest. Lawson remembered standing in a briefing room years ago, telling new agents that power was not the badge, not the gun, not the authority, power was the restraint to use all three with integrity. He remembered saying, "Your decisions must leave the community safer, not more afraid." Tonight, those words echoed louder than the crackling radios around them. He looked directly at Sergeant Porter. "Suspend them on sight," he said. Neither officer spoke. Neither officer could. Porter nodded sharply. "As of this moment, both of you are relieved of duty pending federal and departmental review," she announced, her voice ringing across the neighborhood. "Turn over your weapons, badges, and access cards." The porch camera clicked once more, capturing the officers' trembling hands as they surrendered the authority they had abused. The shift was palpable, the imbalance corrected in a single, simple reversal of power. And as the night settled into a deeper stillness, every witness on the street understood exactly what had just happened. Justice had finally spoken back. The street had gone so quiet that even the crickets seemed to pause as the two officers, pale and trembling, removed their weapons with stiff, mechanical movements. The taller officer placed his service weapon into Sergeant Porter's outstretched hand, his fingers reluctant to let go, as if surrendering it meant surrendering the last illusion of control he had clung to all night. The second officer followed, slower, his eyes darting between Lawson and the growing cluster of neighbors who watched with a mixture of shock, vindication, and long overdue recognition. Nia's voice continued through the phone, calm and clinical. "Weapons logged. Suspension timestamp recorded. Federal protocol is active and will remain active until your confirmation to close the incident, sir." Lawson lowered the phone, his face steady beneath the porch light, not triumphant, not angry, simply resolved. He had carried this composure through interrogations, through briefings, through moments where the stakes were high enough to shift national security. Yet here, on his own porch, the weight of it felt different. More personal. Deeper. The taller officer attempted to speak again, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Agent Lawson, we will cooperate fully." "Please understand that we do not finish that sentence," Lawson said, not raising his voice but slicing through the air with precision. "You had plenty of chances tonight to understand something before drawing your weapons." Across the street, a teenager whispered, "He is not even yelling," and his mother replied softly, "He does not have to." Lawson finally stepped closer to the edge of the porch, closing the distance not with aggression but with presence. "Look at this street," he said, gesturing to the neighbors along the sidewalks and porches. "Every single person here knows exactly what this was. It was not protocol. It was not precaution. It was profiling." The second officer's chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. "We are asking for the chance to make this right," he said, but Lawson shook his head slowly. "You cannot make it right. You can only be accountable for what you did." Sergeant Porter held out her hand again. "Your badges," she said. The taller officer hesitated for a single desperate second before unclipping the badge from his uniform. It glinted under the streetlights as if reflecting the reality he had tried to outrun. The second officer removed his as well, his hands shaking so badly that the metal plate nearly slipped from his fingers. Porter placed both badges into an evidence pouch and sealed it with a firm press. "You are relieved of all active duties," she said. "You will wait in your vehicle until Internal Affairs arrives. Do not leave this street." The taller officer looked like a man whose world had collapsed inward. "Agent Lawson," he whispered, "I am sorry." "Truly?" Lawson's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "You are sorry that you misjudged the consequences," he said. "But you were not sorry when you misjudged the man." A quiet murmur spread among the neighbors. A woman in a blue robe took a small step forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "We saw everything," she said. "And it happens too often." The words landed with the weight of a community that had been silent for too long. Lawson nodded to her, acknowledging not just her statement but the truth behind it. He lifted his phone again. "Nia," he said, "attach the civilian witness recordings to the documentation file." "Already done, sir," she replied. "Multiple uploads detected from the street. Evidence synced." Lawson looked back at the officers one last time. "This is not about ruining your lives," he said. "It is about making sure you understand the lives you put at risk without a second thought." Neither officer spoke. Neither officer could. And as the gravity of the night steadied into place, the street understood that this was the moment the entire narrative turned, the moment when truth stopped being a whisper and became a verdict. For a long moment, the suspended silence on the street felt heavier than any siren, any spotlight, any shouted command that had come before it. The two suspended officers stood beside their cruiser, hands clasped in front of them, stripped of authority but drowning in the consequences of how they had used it. Sergeant Porter finished sealing the evidence pouch containing their badges and weapons, her expression firm, professional, and utterly unmoved by the pleading looks the officers kept sending her way. "Internal Affairs is en route," she said into her radio, her voice echoing with the clarity of someone who refused to let this night be buried under excuses. "They have acknowledged the federal escalation. Estimated arrival is 8 minutes. Around them, neighbors continued to gather in quiet clusters, some wrapped in blankets, some in slippers, some still holding phones that captured everything under the glow of porch lights and smartphone screens. A man with salt and pepper hair stepped closer to Lawson's property line, pausing respectfully before speaking. "Agent Lawson," he said, voice rough with emotion, "none of this should have happened to you." Lawson looked at him, then at the growing group, people of different ages, different races, different stories, all bound by the weight of witnessing something that had crossed a line. "It should not happen to anyone," Lawson said. "Not here. Not anywhere." Another neighbor, a young mother holding a sleeping toddler against her shoulder, spoke from the edge of her driveway. "They did not even ask you a question before treating you like a criminal," she said. "We saw it. We all saw it." Lawson nodded slowly, acknowledging her courage to speak aloud the truth many had been whispering. His porch camera shifted slightly as it continued documenting the scene, its red recording light blinked steadily like a heartbeat. Nia's voice returned through the phone, steady yet somehow gentler than before. "Sir, multiple civilian uploads have been verified. I have cross-synced the footage. Internal Affairs will have a complete chronology." The second officer flinched as if struck, realizing there was no path out of accountability now. "Please," he said weakly, "we cooperated. We stood down. We followed orders when the situation changed." Lawson stepped down from the porch, not to threaten, not to intimidate, but to make sure his next words landed at eye level. "You followed orders only after you realized who I was," he said. "But you would not have needed orders at all if you had respected who I was before you knew my title." The taller officer blinked hard, fighting the sting of humiliation. "We were trying to protect the neighborhood." "From what?" Lawson asked, his voice calm but devastating. "From the homeowner entering his own home? Or from the picture you already had in your mind?" A ripple of agreement moved through the neighbors, soft but unmistakable. The officers looked down, no longer able to hold the weight of his gaze. Sergeant Porter stepped forward again. "You both will remain here until Internal Affairs arrives," she said. "You will not speak to one another, you will not leave this location, and you will not attempt to justify your actions to anyone present." The officers nodded silently, defeated. Lawson took a breath, then turned slightly toward the crowd as though addressing the entire street. "This is not about revenge," he said. "It is about responsibility. It is about ensuring that what happened here tonight does not happen to the next person who looks like me." The teenager who had been filming earlier lowered his phone slowly. "Sir," he said, voice soft but reverent, "I have never seen someone stay that calm while being treated that unfairly." Lawson offered him a faint, steady nod. "Staying calm is not the same as staying silent," he said. "Tonight, you saw why." And the quiet that followed was not fear anymore, it was respect. The low hum of an approaching engine rolled through the neighborhood, steady and deliberate, signaling the arrival of internal affairs before the cruiser even turned onto the street. The suspended officers straightened instinctively, their backs rigid, their faces drained of whatever color remained. Neighbors shifted slightly, watching with the quiet anticipation of people who understood they were witnessing the conclusion of something that had begun long before tonight. The internal affairs vehicle pulled to a stop behind the officer's cruiser, its headlights washing over the scene like a final, clinical truth. Two investigators stepped out, both wearing plain suits and carrying tablets already synced to the federal escalation files. The lead investigator, a woman with a precise stride and a voice that carried without raising volume, approached Sergeant Porter first. "We received the full protocol packet," she said, tapping her tablet. "Civilian uploads. Body camera footage. Federal documentation. Everything matches the escalation summary initiated by Special Agent Lawson." Her eyes shifted to Lawson with clear respect. "Sir, thank you for your cooperation during the review process." Lawson nodded once, composed as ever. "Proceed." The investigators turned to the officers, their tone devoid of sympathy or hostility, it was simply official. "Place your hands where we can see them," the lead investigator instructed. "This is a standard administrative separation procedure pending review." The taller officer complied quickly, almost too quickly, fear pushing his movements. The second officer hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed suit. Both men were instructed to step forward, turn around, and remain still while the investigators conducted a procedural search for any unlogged equipment. A woman watching from across the street whispered to her husband, "This is what accountability looks like," and he nodded with a solemn expression. When the search was complete, the lead investigator spoke again. "Both officers, you are now formally placed on administrative separation. Your access to department systems has been revoked. Your clearance has been suspended. You will accompany us for initial intake and questioning." The taller officer looked like he might collapse. "Ma'am," he said, voice shaking, "we did not know who he was." The investigator did not blink. "Your misconduct does not depend on who he is. It depends on what you did." The weight of that sentence pressed down on the entire street. Lawson stood silently, letting the truth settle without adding to it. He did not need to. It carried itself. The investigators turned to him. "Agent Lawson, your documentation confirms a complete and compliant escalation. Do you have any final statements you wish added to the immediate report?" Lawson looked at the officers, not with anger but with a gravity born from lived experience. "Add this," he said. "A mistake is when you misunderstand information. A decision is when you act on prejudice." The investigator typed every word without hesitation. Neighbors murmured softly, the message rippling through them like a shift in the air. The officers were guided to the internal affairs vehicle, their steps heavy, their uniforms suddenly feeling more like visible reminders of what they had mishandled than symbols of authority. As the doors closed behind them, a quiet settled over the street once more, but this time it felt different. There was no tension, no fear, no accusation hanging in the air. Only clarity. Only the echo of accountability. Sergeant Porter approached Lawson one final time. "Agent Lawson," she said, "the department acknowledges the gravity of what happened here." Lawson met her gaze. "Make sure your officers do too," he replied. "Every single one of them." She nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. We will." When the internal affairs vehicle pulled away, neighbors slowly drifted back toward their homes, but not before offering Lawson small nods of respect, gratitude, and something deeper, recognition. A young man paused at the edge of Lawson's lawn. "Sir," he said, "you handled all of that without raising your voice once." Lawson exhaled softly, the night finally beginning to loosen around him. "I did not need to raise my voice," he said. "I raised the standard." And with that, the night ended not in chaos, but in truth. The internal affairs vehicle disappeared around the corner, its taillights fading into the quiet suburban darkness, leaving behind a street that felt strangely lighter, as if the air itself had exhaled after holding tension for far too long. Neighbors lingered for a moment longer, exchanging glances that carried both relief and the heavy acknowledgement that they had witnessed something rare, a moment where truth had not been buried under authority, but had instead risen above it. Agent Lawson stood on his porch, the glow of the light casting a calm halo across his shoulders. He looked out over the street, watching as the last few residents slowly drifted back toward their homes, wordlessly offering him nods of respect. He returned each gesture with a quiet, composed nod of his own. The night was settling again, but its stillness was different now. It was no longer the brittle silence of fear, it was the firm quiet of finality. A finality of truth. A finality of accountability. Sergeant Porter approached him, her steps measured and respectful. "Agent Lawson," she said, her voice lower now, carrying the tone of someone speaking not from protocol but from sincerity, "I want to acknowledge your restraint tonight. Many people would not have held themselves the way you did." Lawson offered a small, steady nod. "Restraint is not the absence of feeling," he said. "It is the refusal to let the wrong emotion lead." Porter exhaled, the weight of the night reflected in her posture. "We will brief the chief first thing in the morning. Your documentation and the civilian recordings will make this impossible to ignore." "Good," Lawson replied. "Ignoring moments like this is how they repeat." Porter nodded once more before stepping away to coordinate the last procedural details with dispatch. Lawson turned toward his door, lifting his keys once again, the same simple motion that had begun this entire ordeal. But this time, he was interrupted by a soft voice from across the yard. It was the same teenage boy who had filmed earlier, standing near the edge of Lawson's lawn. His hands were shoved awkwardly into the pockets of his hoodie, his expression unsure but determined. "Sir," he said, "can I ask you something?" Lawson paused, turning slightly. "Go ahead." The boy took a breath. "How did you stay so calm?" "If that had been me, I would have yelled. I would have. I do not know. Something." His voice cracked on the last word. Lawson stepped down from the porch, the wooden steps creaking softly beneath him. He stopped at the bottom, making sure he was at the boy's level before speaking. "When I was younger," Lawson said, "I believed anger was the only way to be heard. But anger does not always change the outcome. Sometimes it only makes the world hear the wrong part of the message." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing every syllable. "So what did you do instead?" Lawson's voice grew quieter, but firmer. "I learned to let the truth speak louder than my volume." The boy stared at him, the realization settling deep. "And tonight, it worked," he said. Lawson shook his head gently. "Tonight, it did more than work," he replied. "Tonight, it showed every person on this street what justice looks like when it stands its ground." The boy smiled, a small, genuine expression filled with awe. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. Lawson placed a calm hand on the boy's shoulder. "One day," he said, "you will be the one standing on a porch like this, choosing how to respond. And because you saw this tonight, you will choose well." The boy nodded again, deeper this time, as if committing the memory to something inside him. Lawson returned to his porch, finally unlocking his door. Before stepping inside, he looked once more at the quiet street, the dim glow of distant porch lights, the lingering impression of a community that had unexpectedly found itself united by truth. And as he crossed the threshold into his home, one final thought settled over the night like a closing scene: justice had not just been served, it had been witnessed. Inside his home, the soft click of the lock settling into place echoed louder than it should have, as if sealing off the chaos that had unfolded just outside. Agent Lawson stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. The house was dim but warm, still carrying the scent of cedar from the polished floors, still holding the structure of a life built on discipline, purpose, and the quiet pursuit of justice. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door and took a slow breath, not out of exhaustion but out of reflection, the kind that rises only after a night that shifts something deep within a person. His phone vibrated again, the screen lighting up with Nia's name. He pressed speaker, setting the device on the console table. "Sir," she said, her voice still steady, "Internal Affairs has completed initial intake. The officers will remain in administrative custody overnight. Federal escalation is logged. The regional director will contact you at 9 in the morning." Lawson nodded even though she could not see it. "Thank you, Nia. And thank you for your precision tonight. You trained me." "For nights like this," she replied. "Rest well, sir." The call ended. He stepped deeper into his living room, past the framed citations and photographs lining the shelves. One photo caught his eye, an image of him at 29, shaking hands with the bureau chief the day he was promoted to special agent in charge. He remembered the exhilaration of that day, the pride of becoming one of the youngest to hold that seat, and the private promise he had made to himself that he would earn that respect every single day, not demand it. Tonight, that promise had been tested more intensely than he could have imagined. He sank into the chair by the window, the one facing the street he now saw not just as a home but as the site of something larger than a simple police encounter. Outside, porch lights blinked off one by one as neighbors retreated into the safety of their homes. Yet Lawson knew sleep would not come easily for many of them. Tonight had forced them to witness what prejudice looked like in real time. It had forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth that authority, when unchecked, could become a weapon rather than a shield. His gaze drifted to his reflection in the window, calm eyes, steady posture, but beneath that, the old memory surfaced without permission. He was 19 again, walking home from his part-time job, stopped by two officers who insisted he matched a description they never actually described. He remembered the fear, the helpless frustration, the long walk home afterward, wondering if he would always be seen as a suspect before a citizen. That memory now stood shoulder to shoulder with tonight, not haunting him but reminding him why he chose the path he did. A soft chime from his security system indicated a new upload. His porch camera had finished syncing the last of the footage. He opened it on his phone, watching the night unfold from the outside perspective. The commands. The assumptions. The moment of revelation. The shift in power. The accountability. But something unexpected struck him as he watched. It was not his badge that changed the course of the night. It was his composure. His refusal to shrink. His decision to let truth speak for itself. He set the phone down and closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of that realization to settle. Then, from outside, he heard the soft, hesitant sound of footsteps on his walkway. He stood, moving toward the door without hurry, and opened it to find the young mother from earlier standing under the porch light, her toddler now asleep against her shoulder, her face lit with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "Agent Lawson," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. My son saw everything tonight. And because of how you handled it, he will not be afraid the next time he sees a uniform." Lawson felt the truth of her words settle into the night like a quiet benediction. "Then it was worth it," he said gently. She nodded, offering him a small, profound smile before stepping away into the dark. As Lawson watched her leave, the night no longer felt heavy, it felt changed. When the young mother disappeared down the walkway, the soft glow of her porch light flickering in the distance, Agent Lawson stepped back inside and closed the door gently behind him. The house felt different now, not because it had changed, but because the night had carved something meaningful into its walls, a reminder that justice is not only written in policy or delivered through systems, but forged in the moments when a person stands unwavering in the truth of who they are. He moved through the living room slowly, pausing to straighten a framed photograph on the wall, a candid shot of him speaking to a group of new recruits, all of them watching with the kind of focus reserved for someone whose presence commands respect without demanding it. The memory of that day surfaced, the lesson he had delivered echoing in his mind: power without integrity is merely force. Integrity without courage is merely intention. Tonight, both concepts had collided in front of his own doorway. And he had chosen. He crossed into the kitchen, filling a glass of water and letting the faucet run for an extra moment while he gathered his thoughts. The night outside had quieted fully now, replaced by the steady hum of distant streetlights and the familiar rhythm of his home settling into sleep. As he sipped the water, his phone buzzed again. This time it was not Nia, not internal affairs, not a federal alert. It was a message from a number he recognized but had not heard from in years, an old mentor who had retired long before Lawson reached his current rank. The message was simple. Saw the footage. You carried yourself exactly as I trained you to. Proud of you. Lawson stared at the words for a long moment before typing a response. Thank you. The work continues. He set the phone down and leaned on the counter, letting the weight of the night move through him without pressing him down. There was no triumph in what had happened, no celebration in watching others fall. Justice was not a victory parade. It was a standard. And tonight, that standard had been upheld not with shouts, not with force, but with unwavering clarity. He returned to the window and looked out over the street that had been a stage for chaos only an hour earlier. Now it rested in stillness, the trees swaying gently under the faint breeze, the houses holding their quiet dignity. A few porch lights remained on, warm and steady, as if the neighborhood itself was keeping vigil in the aftermath. Lawson's reflection stared back at him in the glass, calm, strong, marked by the lived truth of someone who knew that silence could be a weapon or a shield depending on how it was wielded. Tonight, his silence had been neither. It had been a message. A declaration. A line drawn. And it had been heard. He stepped back from the window and made his way toward the stairs. Halfway up, he paused, listening for a moment to the faint hum of life beyond his home, a world that would wake tomorrow with new conversations, new questions, new awareness. Perhaps some would see the footage online and dismiss it as just another incident. But others, those who watched with empathy instead of defensiveness, would understand. They would see the quiet power in a man who refused to be reduced by someone else's fear. They would see the importance of accountability, not as punishment, but as necessary correction. And they would carry the message forward. Lawson reached the top of the stairs and turned toward his bedroom. As he placed his hand on the door, a final thought settled over him with the weight and grace of truth fully realized. Tonight had not been about proving his authority. It had been about reminding the world that dignity does not need permission. It does not need validation. It simply needs someone willing to stand firm when it is challenged. He switched off the last light in the hallway, letting the darkness fold gently around him like the closing frame of a film. And in that quiet, steady moment, the lesson of the night echoed with unwavering certainty. He had not raised his voice, he had raised the standard.